Hello everyone, my name is Jim Mirabelli and I'm a Math Assessment Specialist for the Indiana Department of Education. The purpose of this presentation is to share the updates that have been made to the math toolboxes. Now, one way to access the toolboxes is to start from the IDOE homepage and then click on Educators. Then click on Common Core State Standards Resources. And then finally scroll down and click on Mathematics Toolboxes. Now, most of the toolboxes contain the same information, so what I'd like to do is show you the Grade 5 and Algebra 1 toolboxes as an example. And I'm going to give a very brief description of each document in the toolbox. So let's start by looking at Grade 5. When you click on Grade 5 Common Core State Standards Math Toolbox, what happens is a folder will pop up and you just need to open that folder and you'll see 5 documents there. And the first document is the Grade 5 Mathematics Standards, and it looks like this. And this document really speaks for itself. It is the standards. The second document is an example of how you might sequence the content in Grade 5. And this is the first page of that document. The third document contains the standards for mathematical practice and websites that are helpful to support your implementation of the standards. The fourth document in the toolbox discusses the math shifts in the standards and also highlights the major work in each grade. And you can see here that this page highlights the major clusters, supporting clusters, and additional clusters for kindergarten, and then this will go up all the way through grade 8. And the fifth document, and most certainly not the least of the documents, is our instructional and assessment guidance. And this document truly encompasses most of what you need in terms of the standards, priorities and content, and assessment information. And I'll share a link at the end of this presentation that gives access to a different recording that goes into much greater detail about this instructional and assessment guidance document. And if you're not familiar with this document, then I strongly encourage you to view that recording. I'll also provide my contact information at the end if you have any questions. So let me say that if you were familiar with the toolboxes before this WebEx, then they shouldn't look too different, as we really made a few minor changes. With regard to the K-8 toolboxes, the standards document, the sequence document, and this instructional and assessment guidance documents did not change at all. For K-8, the updates were mostly fine-tuning and a bit of house cleaning. Now, the somewhat larger updates were with the high school toolboxes. So let's look at Algebra 1. Now, you'll notice that when you click on the Algebra 1 toolbox, that the types of documents are very similar to Grade 5. You'd see the standards, the math practices and web resources, the shifts in major work, the sequence document. But then you'll see the fifth document is a little bit different. It's called Algebra 1 ECA Information. And this is what that document looks like. Now, this probably looks familiar. And the purpose of this document is to give you information about which Indiana indicators are considered to be critical, important, and additional, and also which indicators may be assessed on the ECA. So this information should provide nice guidance when making decisions about curriculum, instruction, and assessment. Now, I also wanted to open the Algebra 1 standards document and walk through a few things because the structure is quite different than the K-8 standards documents. First, the front matter on page 1, which you see here, contains critical information. So let me take a few minutes to read some of it. Notice the symbols here which indicate whether the content is considered to be major with the green square or rectangle, supporting, which is denoted with a blue outlined square or rectangle, and then additional clusters denoted with the yellow circle. This information is so important in terms of thinking about prioritizing content and focusing on the most important work in the course. Also notice the reference to the standards for mathematical practice, which must be practiced daily in connection with math content. Notice just below the standards for mathematical practice, cross-cutting standards, and notice the infinity symbol here. This indicates standards that are considered to be cross-cutting, meaning that the content in those standards are appropriate for more than one course. And you'll notice in the notes section of this document, which you'll see in just a minute, that we provide limits and clarifying information for those cross-cutting standards. And that information is there to guide your focus on those particular standards. Finally, you see the reference to our Algebra 1 ECA at the bottom of this first page. And really, first and foremost, students enrolled in Algebra 1 must have an opportunity to learn the material assessed on the ECA. So let's look now at the next page, which is the start of the actual Algebra 1 standards. Notice the first domain here, which is the real number system. And the only cluster in that domain is use properties of rational and irrational numbers. Also notice the yellow circle, which indicates that the standards in this cluster are considered to be additional information. You also see that this cluster has only one standard in it, which is denoted as N-RN.3, which is conveyed in this manner, and that is the N represents the conceptual category, which is number and quantity. The Rn represents the domain, which is the real number system. And the 3 represents that this is the third standard in that domain. The first two standards of this domain are actually in the Algebra 2 standards. Now you'll notice that all of the standards are in the left column of the table and notes are in the right column. And in the Algebra 1 document, in the notes column, the first bullet point of each standard will always indicate a degree of alignment between the Algebra 1 Common Core State Standards and our previous Indiana Algebra 1 standards. If you see more than one bullet point per standard, then that information is either for the cross-cutting standards, in which that information will provide, again, limits and clarifying information, or it provides other information to either help describe the standard better or suggest other web links to sample tasks that are aligned to the standard. So the bulk of the pages in this document contain the standards. But what I want to do now is discuss the last page of the document, which contains sort of a summary of the standards. And in that summary, I'll first draw your attention to the table. You see the Algebra 1 standards listed under the conceptual categories of number and quantity, algebra, functions, and statistics and probability. Notice that some of the standards have Indiana indicators noted in parentheses. This shows where there is some degree of alignment between the Algebra 1 Common Core State Standards and our previous Algebra 1 standards. Now the degree of alignment varies, so you'll want to look in the previous pages in the notes column to see more detail about the alignment. The other thing that I want to point out at the top of this page is that we've highlighted the Indiana indicators that do not align with the Algebra 1 Common Core State Standards, but may be assessed on the ECA. And that information is critical because your first priority is to ensure that students have an opportunity to learn the material that may be assessed on the ECA for students that are enrolled in Algebra 1. Now that being said, if I was teaching Algebra 1 this school year, I would prioritize in this manner. Number one, I would provide an opportunity for my students to learn the material on the Algebra 1 ECA. And I would use the Algebra 1 ECA information document and the standards document in the toolbox to inform my decisions. Number two, I would teach the Algebra 1 Common Core State Standards to a degree that is appropriate for my students, realizing that this may look different in various classrooms, because I'm sure that some classes would be more ready to learn more of the content from the Common Core State Standards than other classes. Now, a quick note about the Algebra 2 and Geometry folders. I'm not going to open those toolboxes, but I'll tell you that those folders contain the same information as the Algebra 1 folder, except they do not contain an ECA document since we don't have state-mandated ECAs for those courses. And a quick note about advanced analysis and modeling, finite, and pre-calc. All of the documents in those toolboxes are in draft mode. We recommend that you use them, but we want to point out that we intend to review those standards more extensively and that there may be updates in the future. So this concludes the presentation. Please note my contact information if you have any questions, and the web address to access the other recording that I mentioned earlier about the instructional and assessment guidance documents. Thank you.